Recording stopped.
Seems unnaturally quiet. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
I just wanted to make sure that there was actual sound because we're also silent.
Yes. I think maybe a little tired, but
yes, everyone has been working hard.
Yes, that's right. That's right. Okay. Still 1 minute and we have a quorum, but I'm missing 2 folks. All right, I'll wait 2 more minutes for our board members. To be on time is to be late. What do you need? Good night. Good night. Okay, there's Rob. I'm waiting a little bit because I sent a message about reordering and adding things to the agenda. I'm not sure if all board members received it, so I want to be clear that we're all on the same page before we jump into a pretty loaded agenda. There she is. Okay. Okay, I'm going to push record.
Recording in progress.
All right, welcome everyone. It is Wednesday, February 9th. It is 6:31. This is a regularly scheduled select board meeting. This is a remote only meeting in accordance to new provisions made for the open meeting law. My name is Roger Arnold. I am joined by Claudette Brochu, Mary Layton, Rob Gear, Marsha Calloway. Interim town manager Rod Francis is with us as well. Okay, so the first item on the agenda is the approval of the agenda. And I have some changes that I would like to propose for folks, if that's okay. So what I would like to do is I would like to, first of all, pull correspondence completely from the consent agenda. I think there's significant correspondence in there. So the motion sheet that we received has motions for receiving correspondence individually. So some of them won't require substantial discussion, but some of them may. So we'll just go through them. So what we'll do is correspondence will come right after the consent agenda, and we'll address them all separately. In that time, board members may make some comments. We can take some public comments, but there'll be no significant action or discussion as per our rules of procedure, okay? Unless we vote to do so at a future agenda. Because we have an update on the contract with the town manager candidate, and so I would like to move that as immediately following the approval of the agenda. It'll be a little awkward because all these folks who have joined us will be put back into a waiting room, and we will talk in executive session for a brief period of time, hopefully, and then we will come out with an action. So that I'm proposing for right after the approval of the agenda. Then finally, we had the benefit of discussing a little bit. We had the benefit of presenting the town meeting day presentation materials. If members have some feedback for Claudette and I as presenters, we'd be happy to hear it. So I'd like to add that to the agenda, potentially before item number 6, before our executive, but we should see how we're feeling, right? So those are the proposed changes to the agenda that I have for you all. Okay. I'm seeing some nods from Claudette. So, and okay, great. So can I get a motion just for to maybe approve the agenda as amended?
I move to approve the agenda as amended to add consideration of the town manager contract, separation of the correspondence from the consent agenda, and review of the town meeting presentation.
Okay, thank you, Mary. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay. Made by Mary, seconded by Rob. All in favor, please raise your hand. Okay, thank you so much. Okay. So now, as I alluded to, thank you folks for joining us, but I'm going to put you back in the waiting room following the approval of the executive session motion, and we'll bring you back in a short period of time, hopefully, but we thank you for your forbearance. So can I get a motion for that? How's that? Go ahead, Mary.
I move to enter executive session under 1 VSA 313A3 to consider the appointment or employment of a public employee.
Okay, is there a second?
Second.
Okay, made by Mary, seconded by Rob. Thank you. All in favor, please raise your hand. Okay, thank you. And so folks, we'll be back. I'm going to pause the recording. I'll put you all in the waiting room. Thank you for your patience. Okay.
Recording stopped.
Okay.
Is that everyone?
All right. Let me turn the recording back on.
Recording in progress.
Okay. Thanks so much, everyone, for your patience while we had that executive session. Is there a motion to enter public session?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, made by Mary, seconded by Rob. All in favor, please raise your hand. Okay. Was that a yes?
What was this for?
To enter public session?
Public session.
Okay, unanimous. Great. Now we're in public session. Okay. So, without further ado, on behalf of the board, I'm really pleased to announce that Rod Francis has been selected as Norwich's next town manager. As folks know, Rod has been serving in the interim role as town manager since August 31st, since the departure of Herb Durfee. And we are really pleased with the management team he has both onboarded and brought in to do the great work for the town of Norwich. We believe that he has acquired great insights from his work as a director of planning that will serve us really well in this unique moment. So we are really thrilled to announce that to all of you tonight. And we'll be sending a press release out to news outlets. And so before we take a vote to have me sign the contract, I just want to turn to board members if they have any comments that they would like to make, and then I'll see if I can find Rod here as well. Rod is looking down. Okay, there he is. Go ahead, Mary.
I would just like to say I'm very excited to be working with Rod, and I think he will be very effective both in the broad leadership and management of our community and also in the particulars. So welcome, Rod.
Go ahead, Claudette.
I was going to say, did you forget my name?
Yes, sorry, I hear my baby in the background. Go ahead.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, and I just want to thank Rod for the work he's done as interim. Norwich is not an easy town to try to manage, and I think he's done a great job.
Great. Go ahead, Rob.
Yeah, over the past few years, I've worked on and off with Rod as a member of committees, and I'm very pleased that he's accepted the position. And we look forward to a lot of progress in town governance.
That's great. So I'm going to I think I should take a motion. The motion is on the sheet. Well, I'm going to take the motion, and then we'll have a little bit of discussion. And we'll have some discussion, and we'll turn to Rod. Okay. So is that okay, Mary? Do you mind making that?
No, I don't mind making that.
Thank you so much.
I move to approve the town manager employment contract with Rod Francis and to authorize Roger Arnold to sign said contract on behalf of the select board.
That's great. So let's roll call.
Second.
We got a second.
Oh, sorry. Second. Who would like to second?
Second.
Okay. Thank you, Rob, for seconding. Let's roll call. Mary, how do you vote?
I vote yes.
Okay. Claudette, how do you vote?
Yes.
Rob, how do you vote?
Yes.
Marcia, how do you vote?
No.
And I am a yes. Okay. Any further discussion?
I'll just say that although I voted no for specific reasons, I assure everyone in town that the board works closely with the town manager. We'll continue to do that, all for the benefit of the town.
Thank you so much, Marcia. So roll called. Rod, we'll turn to you. Anything that you would like to say before we move on?
I'd like to say thank you to the board for those kind remarks, and I look forward to working with you closely to make Norwich a lovely, for Norwich to continue being a lovely place to live and work. Okay. Thank you.
Great. Thanks so much. We really appreciate that. We're so excited. And we should also be sure to thank the screening committee and the interview committee, the folks in the community who filled out the town manager survey. We really appreciate everyone's participation and input in this decision, right? So thank you to all of them as well, all of these members. Okay, all right. So let's then move on to the consent agenda. I think is that
public
right?
comment.
Public comment. Thank you. Are there any members of the public who would like to make a comment for items not on the agenda? Linda Cook, I see your hand. Go ahead.
Thank you. I'm not sure where this is on the agenda. I have a question. The memo from Roger Arnold conversation. It's not legible for me to actually grasp what this message is totally about. Is there a way this can be retyped where it's readable? And if so, which place in the agenda is this coming up on?
The correspondence in question is correspondence I had with Mary Gorman around the preferred siting process. I'm happy to all of my entire inbox is the town of Norwich. It belongs to them. So I'm happy to send the more clear correspondence to be published in the subsequent packet. Okay.
And who is Mary Gorman?
She's a citizen. She's your
Okay.
citizen and neighbor.
And she's present in this meeting.
She's waving to you.
Oh, hi.
Okay, great. Wonderful. Thank you, Linda.
Thank you.
Is there another? I see another hand. This is Brooke. Go ahead.
Thank you. I have a question in terms of
Identify.
My name is Brooke Dingledine. I live in Randolph, Vermont, but I'm an environmental and energy attorney. And I have been contacted by some neighbors to the proposed Norwich solar array. And I was curious because I had heard that the Planning Commission and the Select Board were focused on commenting for a preferred sites letter, but only on the issue of the zoning bylaws as opposed to the proper document that needs to be reviewed by the town if they're going to make a recommendation on a preferred sites letter, which is the town plan document. Is that on the agenda for any discussion tonight, or could I speak to that issue now?
So it is not. So it is not on the agenda for tonight. But we, in recognition that we've received correspondence, we earlier in the evening we pulled all correspondence from the agenda. We will make a motion to receive them and discuss the correspondence. As chair, I will have nominal discussion and there will be no action taken because we'll be discussing that as correspondence. So it's not on the agenda, so you may feel free to continue a public comment during this period if you'd like.
Okay, great. I have been one of the few attorneys in Vermont, other than attorneys who work for the industry, for the solar siting industry. And recently, a number of townspeople in various central Vermont towns have come knocking at my door asking for advice and information because preferred sites letters seem to be flying off the shelves here from various towns for telecommunications facilities as well as solar projects. And my concern, and I have shared this at Randolph and Chelsea, and I will be in Worcester, is that the merchant developers are coming to these towns asking the towns to become cheerleaders to provide a support letter and all relevant information is not necessarily being shared. And more importantly, the towns are, in my opinion, not clear on what their role is. And I think it's incumbent upon the town. These are very complicated proceedings. And recently, I've been involved in 2 solar projects down in Bennington, Vermont. They've 7 years of litigation up and down to the Supreme Court. I've forgotten how many times now. But the problem with towns in taking positions that go beyond looking at a project and determining whether it is in compliance with their town plan. In other words, if they go beyond that and say, well, it might violate some sections of our town plan, but we think it's a good idea because we like renewable energy. If that's not what your law says, is in your town plan, if your town plan says we have areas that we want to protect, we have ridge lines, we have an overlay district, we don't want industrial development in that area, it is not a preferred site, then it becomes incumbent upon the applicant at that moment, in the case of Norwich, to convince the town that somehow this still is a preferred site, even though it's in an overlay district that is not a preferred site area. And the problem is that it sounds to me like Norwich is looking at the wrong document. And the biggest concern that I have in terms of the position of towns here, and we have this in Supreme Court opinion within the last few months, is that if a town does not consistently interpret their laws that they have enacted and put into place consistently, and it becomes an arbitrary or standardless town plan, because you are not applying it equally to everyone under the law, then it becomes meaningless and it becomes a non-standard. And the Public Utility Commission in this process, they are actually the entity who has the right to say, you flunk on the town plan, applicant, but we're going to give you a certificate of public good anyway, because we have the trump card. We have been given authority to outweigh a municipal law in the interest of the public good. That is not the town's task. The town's task is to create law and then to defend their law. And if people don't pass muster, they can go talk with the Public Utility Commission and try to convince them to give them a permit. But and I'll stop it there, but yeah, that's the most important thing that I think you folks need to keep in mind. You need to look at the right document, and more importantly, you need to be very consistent to merely say whether something is or is not in compliance with your town plan, which is your law that you wrote, and you know what the intent of that law was. Thank you.
Thank you for your public comment. And so, folks, we keep public comment to 3 minutes. That's been our practice. Okay, thank you so much. Are there any more public comments for items not on the agenda? And as I mentioned, we will pull correspondence individually for nominal comment. Okay. So I'm going to move on to select board comment for items not on the agenda. The only thing I'll say quickly is I went to the Trails Committee meeting, or rather I was invited to the Trails Committee meeting, and I was happy to attend. The meeting minutes are, I think, reflective of the discussion. I would say that we've talked when we reorganized, we talked about needing to develop stronger communication and bonds, for lack of a better word, with our committees. And I feel that's true more strongly than ever. So, okay. So if there's no other select board comment for items not on the agenda, we'll move on. Marcia, I see your hand. Go ahead.
Just a question about correspondence. That would include Chris Katucki's?
Yep, we are pulling it all individually.
Okay.
That kind of meeting. Okay. Cool. So then let's move on to the consent agenda. Can I get a motion to approve what will be the warrant and the meeting minutes?
I move to approve the consent agenda minus correspondence.
Thank you, Mary. Is there a second? Okay, made by Marcia. So made by Marcia, or made by Mary, seconded by Marcia. Any discussion? All right, all in favor, please raise your hand. Okay, thank you, unanimous. Okay, next is correspondence. Can we start? Let's start with the motion.
Okay, so this is written individual. Maybe
they're
Claudette.
Individually, so Claudette can go ahead.
Claudette, go ahead.
I move to receive correspondence from Neil Fulton and Cheryl Lindbergh regarding a resolution honoring Henry Shire.
A second.
Okay, great, made by Claudette, seconded by Mary. So I just want to reiterate that, that there is an implied ask of us, right, to make a motion to approve a resolution to honor Mr. Henry Shire. His distinguished accomplishments and service to the town of Norwich were outlined very beautifully by the authors. You could see that it highlights anything from his role in capital planning to his years of service as an assistant treasurer to the many roles he played in creating a good community with town meeting day and other programmatic outputs. And so it asks us for good reason to approve a resolution to honor him. So if there's no further, just go ahead, Mary.
I'll just move this because I don't think anyone could argue with Henry Shire. It's a great legacy.
Well, first we need to vote on accepting the correspondence.
Oh, yes, you're right.
Do that. Thank you.
Okay.
We have a lot of procedural matters. So let's vote to accept the correspondence. Thank you, Claudette. All in favor, please raise your hand. Thank you. And I think your comment that you just made, Mary, is perfect for the next motion, if you would like to make it.
Okay, I move to approve the resolution honoring Henry Shire as included in the select board packet.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, made by Mary, seconded by Claudette. Any further discussion on the resolution that honors Henry? Okay. Thank you to Cheryl and Cheryl Lindbergh, who worked obviously very closely with Henry Shire, and thank you to Neil Fulton as well. So with that being said, all in favor, please raise your hand. Thank you. Okay, I think the next one should be easier. Go ahead. Can I get a motion?
Yeah, I'll do it. I move to receive correspondence from Kate Barlow regarding her resignation from the town service officer position.
Okay, thank you, Mary. Is there a second? Okay, made by Marcia. Mary, then Marcia. Okay, other than just with regrets and appreciation, I think I'll call the question if that's okay. All in favor, please raise your hand. Okay, thank you.
Rob didn't vote.
Oh,
sorry.
Sorry.
Yes.
I love the team.
It's going to be like Simon Says here, but yeah.
Teamwork and dreamwork. Okay, but all in favor now that we popped up. Thank you.
Yep.
Can I get a motion to receive the next correspondence?
I move to receive correspondence from Jeff Martin regarding the Regional Energy Coordinator report.
There's a second?
Second.
Okay, made by Mary, seconded by Rob, I believe. Yeah. Okay, any discussion on this report? I'm glad to see it, and hopefully now that and hopefully we'll get to a point where we see a meaningful coordination between the new town manager's office and Jeff Martin, because obviously this is a significant output. Okay. All in favor, please raise your hand. Okay, excellent, thank you. Ryan Gardner.
I move to receive correspondence from Ryan Gardner regarding his resignation from the Recreation Council.
Okay. With thanks for his, is there a second? Okay, made by Mary Marcia. Okay. With thanks for Ryan Gardner's service, I'll call the question. All in favor, please raise your hand. Okay, thank you. Go ahead. The next is the Chris Katucki correspondence.
I move to receive correspondence from Chris Katucki regarding the 2022 town meeting warning.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, made by Mary, seconded by Claudette. I'm going to turn immediately to Rod. Rod, what are we doing in our what work have you done with Bonnie regarding the purpose statements? And we'll use that to answer this question. How's that?
Good evening, everyone. Yes, I have been working with Bonnie on the materials that would accompany mail-in ballots and the town report and in-person voting. So there's a page in the town report that cites statute and shows the article number, the article text, and the purpose statement that goes with it for each of the articles that references a purpose statement. And that's just under a page, including the formatting of the table. So that information is included there in the town report. It'll be at the voting booths for people doing in-person voting, and it will be mailed to out with the ballots for mail-in ballots, I believe. So that's the list. And then it'll be also posted on the town website, and we'll have links to it on the listserv.
That's great. And then all of these actions were obviously reviewed by legal counsel. So,
correct.
So thanks so much, Rod, for that update. Any further discussion? Go ahead, Marcia.
Yeah, and I'd just like to say that always checking things if it bothers me. I posed the question of the Secretary of State's office, also looked at their November 21st publication, Vermont Election Laws. That was November 2021. And there was nothing specifically limiting a reference on the warrant to another document. There is a provision in statute 17 VSA 2472 that provides for an article that's too long to show on the ballot to be posted in the voting booth. Sounds like that's happening. So I'm sure that, that's satisfactory.
Great. So let's call the question if there's no further discussion, okay? All right. All in favor of receiving this correspondence, please raise your hand. Okay. Thank you. Okay. The final one. Okay. Would you like to begin with a motion, Mary?
Yeah, I move to receive correspondence from Heather and Jay Benson et al. Regarding the Upper Loveland Road solar project.
Okay. Thank you, Mary. Is there a second? Okay. Seconded by Marcia. Go ahead. Any discussion? Go ahead, Marcia.
Along the lines of what Attorney Dingledine was talking about, the planning director letter, Rod's letter, said that the Ridgeline Protection Overlay District standards referenced in the town plan are found in the Norwich Zoning Regulations 2009, and that these standards only reference potential visual impact. Therefore, that was the only issue that the Planning Commission or the Select Board should have considered. He also says municipalities can't regulate electric general facilities, which is true, I believe. So I think, as the attorney was saying, the regulations are really a red herring and have nothing to do with the issue. I won't go over what the PUC talks about a preferred site, unfortunately, and they have 9 listed preferred site definitions. Unfortunately, our current town plan says there's a presumption that all of Norwich meets the definition of a preferred site, notwithstanding existing areas of local concern, including ridgeline protections and even the historic village district. Mm-hmm. So the plan, our town plan, which is what we should be looking to, is a little bit contradictory, I think, It says that we're going to guide development away from visually prominent locations on bridge lines. It acknowledges that for the policy to continue with broad community support, it must be balanced with the plan's policies related to preserving the recreational and natural value of those lands. And it calls upon, the PUC to issue a certificate of public good, except in areas already mapped as ridgeline protection. I think based on the above, and especially given the inconsistencies in the town plan language, I believe the board incorrectly indicated our support to the PUC. So it would be my recommendation to contact the clerk of the PUC to see if we could request withdrawal of the letter of support.
Okay, thank you for your comment, Marcia. The only thing I will add that I didn't mention before is that there's supporting information that was published in an addendum to our packet that talked about the process of the town of Norwich follows and has followed for several other projects since. I shouldn't say several, I believe at least one other solar projects. I'm seeing at least two other solar projects since the adoption of the town plan. Okay. All right.
Well, I'll just say, I don't think that past practice doesn't necessarily validate what we're doing. I think we have to re-look at this.
Great. Go ahead, Claudette.
Yeah, just because I would like to see, probably have us have a discussion at a future agenda, that gets into all of this and where we can have some thoughtful discussion and not have it as part of correspondence.
That's fine. And the only thing I will say further for anything regarding this matter is we take recommendations from the Planning Commission on these matters, right? We approve both the zoning and the town plan, but it is the Planning Commission who makes recommendations and delivers products to us. Before anyone considers a future agenda item, we should really respect the process of our colleagues. It is just a good consideration to take a recommendation and choose to reject it, modify, or accept it. That's all. Go ahead, Claudette.
Yeah, and perhaps we could have one of us could reach out to the Planning Commission to see what their thoughts are.
Yes,
and I would be happy to do that.
I think we should discuss it through the agenda sending process is what I would say.
That's fine with me.
Okay, thank you. I'll take, as I said, I would take nominal public comment. Is there, it hasn't, I know that the town of Hartford takes comments or not the town of, I think, no, it's really Burlington that asks residents to speak first and then non-residents. We haven't established a practice, but so I'll take Attorney Dingledean's comments because we haven't established a process for that. Go ahead. Would you like to speak?
Thank you so much. I just wanted to clarify something that you were just talking about. Certainly when you enact ordinances, the Planning Commission plans it, creates the document, and you guys have your public hearings as a select board and enact it. But the Public Utility Commission preferred sites process requires 3 different independent voices of support for a preferred sites letter. It starts at the Town Planning Commission. The Select Board has an independent voice and vote on that. And I have seen sometimes towns have 2 different opinions. And then the Regional Planning Commission also has a say in it. So you have an independent duty separate and apart from the Planning Commission, or a voice if you choose to exercise it. And because you have, I think the folks whom I will be helping and representing if this goes through the whole PUC process, they're concerned because if that process wasn't done correctly, the position of the town that's problematic. If you've had other solar projects that have in fact been through the incorrect process, the thing to do is to do it right this time. if there's been infirmity in the past because you've looked at a zoning ordinance instead of a town plan, you need to move forward, because if they have their CPG, oh well.
Thank you for your comment, and thank you for your comment. I want to be consistent. I have much to say and much to correct, but I won't.
I'll make a comment, Roger. First of all, thank you all for the conversation. Thank you for considering. I'm sorry. Am I not supposed to be talking?
No,
Go ahead. I was adding the
Name and address.
Yeah, your name and address would be
Sure.
helpful.
Pardon me.
Sorry.
Mary Gorman, 504 Hawk Pine, Norwich, Vermont. So thank you for having this conversation. Thank you for your willingness to continue to explore it, the situation. I think really what we are hoping for is just to ensure that the proper review take place. And so thank you for suggesting that you put it on the next agenda and have a thorough discussion.
Sorry, Mary, just to interrupt you. I'm sorry. We agreed that we would just for clarity, we agreed that we would take it up in the agenda setting process. We haven't.
Okay. Thank you for that clarification. Thank you for that. So thank you for at least being willing to reconsider it. I think that the folks in Norwich really want to be sure, at least we all want to be sure that our ridgelines are protected as the town plan states it, valuable land. And I think anyone who lives adjacent to any of these protected properties, protected in terms of not being subject to automatic preferred site licensing, would be very important. I will at further meeting also be sending a notification or recommendation, another letter requesting that the select board consider a requirement that if there will be a site development such as this, that abutters be notified about the discussion. I know that it was Roger let me know that the way people are notified of these things is they need to read the agendas of the select board meeting, and I will do that in the future. But for the abutters, some of the abutters on Upper Loveland Road did not know about this project, and it's quite a impact on their property. And so we'll be suggesting that at least that kind of notification be provided. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you. Let's call the question to receive this correspondence. All in favor, please raise your hand. Thank you. Okay. I think we have moved through the correspondence section of our agenda. What's next on the agenda is
Town manager report.
That's right. Thank you, Mary.
I'm sorry. Did we skip the consent agenda?
We passed it. Minus the correspondence. So
we voted to approve it. Yep.
We've been kind of rocketing along here.
Yeah. Great. So next, let's move on to the town manager report, not that interim town manager report. So Rod, tell us about some significant happenings.
Well, first of all, there seems to be some kind of a flaw. It's the interim town manager report. So there hasn't been much happening since I became the town manager, I hope. Anyway, so
Good, Rod.
I'm hoping for nothing, but I don't think that's true. Anyway, so let me just find where I'm at. I'm sorry, I'm shuffling paper frantically here. All right, so we are making progress, as I outlined in the written report. We're making progress with the new server. As of today, there were the listers software, which is fairly complex and required staffing on, if you like, both sides of the aisle. So technical staffing from our managed care providers, CCI, and technical technicians working for the software company that runs the listers software needed to be monitoring and observing and communicating with the handoff from the old server to the new server for the software that the listers use. And then each one of the listers' computers needed to be, basically rebooted and given new ways of accessing the new server. So I think as of today, this afternoon, the new server is the only server that we're using, which means that the old server can get unceremoniously taken away. This is actually quite big news because it then will trigger a rehab and a refit of the planning and zoning office, which is pretty cramped. And so that will make space available for new staff people that hopefully will be joining us soon. So that's actually big news. And the fact that we're now onto a dependable server with a cloud backup for the first time ever is actually a huge success, a huge accomplishment in a fairly brief period of time. So I want to thank CCI and I want to thank the staff for their patience and the inevitable irritating glitches that go along with doing something on this scale. The next phase, which should be the more enjoyable phase for staff, is that the desktop, the machines at the desk, whether they're laptops or desktop machines, will start coming in and being set up. So it's possible that in the next couple of months, we'll have completely revolutionized the computer and technology resources of the town. I should also point out that we mentioned with CCI that we were interested in upgrading our internet access. Our upload and download speeds are suboptimal. They are worse than your average household capacity with a current Comcast account. And they have resources that allow them to review offerings available to the town, and they've come up with a comparative list of fiber optic providers, which would dramatically increase our productivity and allow for instance, a much more responsive website experience and things such as that. So I want to just flag that I'm going to explore those possibilities in the future, and we'll come back to you with some more information at the time. We have a new finance office assistant, Lacey. She's been working closely with Fielding and taking training in a very difficult period of time, taking taxes and collecting taxes at the same time. So it's been a steep learning curve, but she is doing really well, and we enjoy having her on board. And so we're hoping that this is going to work out for us. And then lastly, it wouldn't be a Tracy Hall report if it wasn't for something going wrong, something breaking. This is only a minor issue. It's the fire extinguisher system that really wants to actually go off at any moment. And of course, as you might imagine, would destroy everything in its wake if it did. So we cannot locate the leak. There's some kind of a leak. It could be related to the weather. What this means is that the system loses pressure, and when it loses pressure enough, it will actually activate. And so that's kind of a problem for us all, particularly the people inclined to hoard more paper than others. So we have instituted a kind of a patch where we've brought in another small compressor to maintain the pressure in the lines so that the leak possibility is pushed off. We've had several visits from Vermont Life Safety, which is the company that's responsible for maintaining the sprinkler system. And in close inspections of the building, we cannot locate the leak. There's no telltale brown signs or brown stains or other signs of a leak. It's possible that it's somewhere where we can't find it right now. And because of the weather, it's too cold to test it. It could be as simple as our line is frozen, and that's what's causing the drop in pressure. But we really can't do anything about this until the weather gets better. So the Home Depot quality do-it-yourselfer compressor, which goes off every 20 minutes in the basement, will continue doing that until it's warm enough for us to figure out what the problem is. I can't give you an estimate of time or expense involved in redoing it because I don't have enough information for that yet. But it is something that obviously we have to monitor and be ready to react to quickly if something goes wrong.
Marcia has a question. Go ahead, Marcia.
Right.
We have flood insurance.
Actually, it's a good question. I believe that we do, but you're making me feel self-conscious about not reviewing the policy. I actually don't know that if flood insurance would cover this. I think I want to check that we've got insurance against some catastrophic event that would cover this. And so, yeah, but I'm hoping that we won't need it. But that's a good reminder. Thank you. So on the DPW front, Chris is hitting the ground running. Things are going really well. The highway garage is being picked up and reorganized. We're working through a range of issues and continue to do so. In particular, Chris has been working very closely with Rita Cito from Two Rivers Regional Planning Commission on getting the projects for this coming construction season together. We'll have two, the box culvert on Route 132 and culvert work on Tiger Town Road, which were in the works from when Larry and Herb were here, but it's moving forward really well. We actually had a bid opening earlier this week for the Tiger Town Road project, and we already have the results. We have to do some checking on who the likely contractor is, but we're moving forward with that. And so this means that our construction season is taking shape. We'll be looking at the roles and responsibilities of individual crew members and making sure that we're in a good situation to move forward there. So that's been going really well. We've received a so-called pre-proof version of the annual audit from our auditor. It's an extremely long document, as you might expect. Not all of the document ends up in the town report, but with Fielding's assistance, there was some change in the formatting of this audit compared to last year's audit, but with Fielding's assistance, we were able to identify the pages that needed to be in the town report. And it is actually in the town report, along with the opinion letter, I believe. And so when you see the town report, you'll see the audit. And we're not behind with the town report. Town report's currently at the printers. Things are going well in that regard. We expect a management letter coming from the auditor soon. That was promised on Friday. I've not heard or seen anything this week yet. And then I should let you know that in discussions with the auditor, committed to her visiting with you at the February 23rd Select Board meeting to present the audit to you. So you can look forward to that. So that was good. And yes, the town report was a very grueling piece of work in the end. Lots of pieces being pulled together. We were helped enormously by the determination and commitment of Jean Law, and I want to call out her in particular, but also Doug Lufkin for his patience and Fielding for being there on multiple different levels to make sure that the town report came together on time. And I can report that both Miranda and I are very relieved and happy that it's finally at the printers. So because that means it's not where we are. So that's great.
Great.
Yeah.
No, that was really wonderful to have done such a lift with the short staff, and not necessarily even having all the files available to you. So I really appreciate it. It got out. I think it got out earlier than last year. So
it did. It's a couple of days earlier than it was last year. So I'm like, yeah,
that's great.
Yeah, thank you.
Do folks have questions for Rod? I think it's great to just a comment, right? Because as I mentioned when, at your announcement, you you hired you made a hire for the DPW director, and it sounds like it's working out well so far. And it's wonderful to hear that he is getting, onboarded and learning about our existing projects with Rita from TRORC. So that's really good to hear. I know that we had a consultant who was helping us out in the transition. Are they still with us and sort of furthering that?
Yes, they've been busy, and we've been focusing on different things with Chris in the first couple of weeks. But there's been some, they've had some time together, which has been great, and it's been very useful for Chris. And I expect that will continue for at least for a little while into the future.
That's great.
It's been good.
Okay. Any other folks have questions or comments for Rod? All right. Oh, I see Linda Cook. Do you have a question?
No, I won't put in the form of a question. I'll say congratulations, Rod. Maybe now you only have your feet in one office, but I'm not sure that's true yet. I hope you've got a little more help for the upstairs. Good luck to you.
Yes. Yes. I think Rod will continue to serve as our planning director until we make that hire. But he is no longer interim town manager. So thank you, Linda. Any other comments? Okay, so next we have a little bit of a conversation with the Childcare Committee and to discuss that final report, that substantial, brilliant work. I would actually like to propose that we take a 5-minute break, if that might be okay, and then really dive into that brilliant and thoughtful document. So I think we will need a 5-minute break before doing that, if that's okay. All right, so let's come back at 7. Let's just say 7. Oh God, let's say it's 7:50. How about that? We'll take a little bit more. Okay, thanks.
Recording stopped.
Okay, I think we said 7:50. So we'll wait for the screens to turn on. Okay, I think Rob will get back here. All right, I'll resume.
Recording in progress.
Okay, resuming the February 9th meeting at 7:50. Okay, so the next item on the agenda is a presentation discussion of key findings from the Norwich Childcare Committee. Before I see that the Childcare Committee Chair Rebecca Holcomb is with us, before spotlighting her to use Zoom language. I think on behalf of the board, it's appropriate to thank this committee for their work. This was a town plan action item to form this committee and to study the issues and problems, opportunities and challenges, I'll say, of childcare in Norwich and the Upper Valley. And I think this is a substantial body of work that we have before us and to consider for future work, right? This is an ad hoc committee. It had an expiration date. And so if we would like the committee to do future work, we will need to ask them to do so. So without further ado, we'll start our conversation. So welcome, Rebecca Holcomb, and thank you for being here with us.
Thank you so much. And is it okay if I share my screen? We have a little presentation. Okay. Oh, it says host disabled participant screen sharing.
I think I just changed it, so you should be good.
Oh, I should right now. Okay.
So, great picture.
I knew it would be late, so I threw in a couple of pictures, hopefully to make you laugh as we do this. First of all, I wanted to thank you so much for convening this. And I also have to start by giving thanks to the tremendous team that worked on this. Mary, you were terrific. It was great to have your constant contact. And I feel like I ought to put Linda Cook on this list as well, because she attended most of our meetings and was incredibly helpful at various points. Also, Brian Loeb and Jamie Rosenfeld, we met late because they both had small children and we had to put them to bed before their parents were free. And Neil O'Dell, who as a representative of the school board was also very, very helpful in keeping us aligned, because early care and learning, which is the broad word or term for childcare, includes children who are at birth all the way up through age 8. And some of the, what we would think of as childcare is also preschool, and that is also provided by our school. So it was nice to have all of those members at the table at that conversation. Just to re-anchor this conversation, I wanted to just repeat what we understood to be our mission. And it is to gather and present information that will help you, the select board, make informed, sound decisions. And also to suggest opportunities or places where you could engage in this sector. And in the report and at various points in the slideshow, I'll reference pages in the report that relate to what I'm saying. And this is to give you, hopefully, a robust understanding, as you said, of the gaps, but also the opportunities before the board. The first thing, the other thing I wanted to mention just by way of starting is that where we got our information. And we are incredibly grateful to the many, many Norwich parents who spent time completing a survey, and also some of them participated in interviews and came to our meetings. We also had surveys and interviews of regional providers. We found that Norwich children are attending childcare not just in the town of Norwich and in neighboring Vermont towns, but also across the river in New Hampshire. And so we did a pretty broad net to try to catch regional providers who serve children from Norwich. We also had a chance to meet with regional, state, and national experts, including people who work nationally and were able to advise us not only on what is happening at the federal level, but what is cutting edge in terms of work at a local level related to childcare. We also reviewed state and regional research and reports looking for robust documents that would help us put what we saw in Norwich in the context of the state and the region more broadly. We also heard from regional employers, particularly at the Vital Communities Symposium, just to cross-reference what we were hearing from various direct participants with what we were hearing from them in that context. And we also did review pending state and federal legislation in this space. This is quite an active space for legislation right now. And that certainly is something that as a select board, you need to watch and track as you move forward. And I'll address some of that later. And I also wanted to start, in your introduction, you talked about some of the challenges. And one of the things we learned right out of the gate is that in this sector, even though the challenges are real and significant to Norwich families, the solutions are not simple. And one of the first things we did, and we made a point to look not just at COVID time childcare, but also look at what was happening generally in this market prior to COVID. And it's clear that although there is a broad consensus that this is a market that is underfunded and perhaps really struggling, that efforts to intervene in it can have sometimes unintended consequences. And one example that's in the report, and you can look at others, and the page references are right there, is that when Vermont several years ago tightened regulations for registered providers, which it did for safety and quality and all the things that people care about, when it also required school districts to pay for universal vouchers for pre-K, but only for children aged 3 to 5 and only for 10 hours a day. And when we made school-based after school into regulated childcares, each of these changes, though it had a policy purpose, also had an unintended policy consequence. And you can imagine if regulations are stricter, that will affect some providers who may not be able to meet those requirements. When districts fund ages 3 to 5 and only for 10 hours a day, that affects some children, but it makes it difficult for other children to use if they need more than 10 hours a day in some settings. But it also means that the energy and the money was going into a subset of this childcare market, which potentially had implications for younger children and other age groups. And when you make school-based after school into regulated childcare, schools are put in the position of evaluating, do we become an organization that has to now bear the cost, the transaction cost of being regulated by two different sectors, or do we just want to give up childcare and become an education institution? And if you think about this, though there was a good rationale for each of these changes, they also do have consequences. And this was the landscape that our study was sitting in. What we saw in that short period of time was that there were significant losses. We actually have less childcare in the state now than we did a couple of years ago. And those losses tended to be concentrated in certain age groups and in certain kinds of providers, and particularly the registered home providers. These are the providers that tend to be smaller, more often family-based settings. And as you can see, there were significant, in that right-hand set of bars, significant losses across all age groups in that sector. And those losses were not set off or offset by increases in care in other settings. And so we came out of that transition with less care overall, and especially less care for the youngest children and for school-age children and after-school type programs. So those are the kinds of things to think about when it seems like a good thing just to push in money. Sometimes just pushing in money, if you're not careful, can actually make your problem worse. And I think we are at a point where we need to be asking questions about that. And the other thing to note is that this is a period when we were putting in significant amounts of money, we also didn't see increases in provider wages. And in fact, the subsidies still bake in that low wage structure. And so we're still in a situation where providers are really struggling to find teachers who can continue to work at the wages they can offer. So that's the landscape that this study took place in. And what we did is we said, okay, that's what the state is saying, and that's what we're seeing regionally. What are our families and our local providers saying? And what they said really reinforced the findings from that sort of larger document search. 3/4 of families that we surveyed said they reduced their work hours or they actually gave up work entirely to provide care for children. And that was particularly true for parents of infants and toddlers. In fact, there's almost no care for infants in this entire region. I mean, it's just very, very scarce. And if you're lucky enough to find a spot, it can cost you up to $25,000 a year to put that infant in care. So many families of the youngest children in particular said that what having a baby meant was one of the parents had to give up work in the transition to be able to take care of a child in the home. And there really weren't options. They just weren't there. One of the reasons that it is so expensive is that the infants need to be in smaller groups. It's not like a classroom at a school where you could have 15 kids or 20 kids. You really have to keep those ratios low for babies so that they're safe. So these are cost challenges that are just built into the model and into that age group as well. And one of the reasons that the infant care is getting so expensive is if you go back to the pre-K provision, we saw that when providers focused on pre-K, and we even had new providers open up who only provided care for 3 to 5 year olds. If they took the 3 to 5 year olds out of those family cares or those programs that served kids who were birthed to 3, those programs that serve those youngest kids, they actually depend on the older children to cross-subsidize their programs. So when you pull the preschool age children out of those programs, you effectively break the business model of some of those programs that serve infants and toddlers. So these are very real structural issues that this sector is dealing with. And it's aggravated by the shortage of teachers. And what we heard from provider after provider after provider is they would love to be able to open up new classrooms and serve more kids, but there literally are not teachers to do that work. And in fact, they find that they're competing head to head with other providers in the region to be able to find someone who could come. And obviously, if a teacher moves from one program to another, it just creates a gap or a hole where another classroom has to shut down someplace else. And one of the structural challenges in this area is that at the prevailing wage, families and providers often find that they can work for the same wage in a place that has much more flexible hours, is less demanding, and that doesn't require the ongoing sort of professional development and training obligations that they would have as a childcare provider. So these are some of the real issues. Whoops, I jumped too far. Sorry. The other thing we notice, and this is important to the select board, if you start to think about what a municipal role could be in childcare. Unlike our public education system, where the Norwich School District serves resident children in Norwich, our providers are fundamentally different in that they're regional. And if you look at, and I included this chart here, if you look at this chart, in the Vermont providers right in our region, and most of them happen to actually be in Norwich, we are lucky, unusually lucky in the number of high quality programs we actually have in our own town. But most of the children in those providers aren't actually from the town of Norwich. They're from other towns as well. And similarly, many Norwich children are attending childcare in other communities. They're at the hospital. They're at the one affiliated with Dartmouth and down in Lebanon. They go to where their parents work. So it's not like a school in that these providers are really regional providers. And anything that you did for just a provider in Norwich, or anything you did for just Norwich children and other providers, would have an impact not just on Norwich, but on the entire ecosystem of care in this area. So I don't think we knew going in how much this is a regional issue. I think we came away with a deep appreciation of that and hope that all of your conversations will really keep that in mind. Okay. Oh, shoot. I can't figure out. There's a delay. I'm sorry. Okay. The other findings that we got, but these are also from our conversations with providers, we asked them all about the demographics and the unique needs, the learning needs in particular of the children they served. And what we found is that in this sector, there's pretty significant segregation by wealth and disability status. And some of that is because the school is often the source of the support for students with disabilities. So they often have to be in programs near the school where the school can access and push in services if needed. But we also found that within our small sample of providers of just this region, there were providers that didn't serve anybody who was eligible for or using a childcare subsidy, which is an income sensitized subsidy. And there was one provider in the sample where every single child was eligible for childcare subsidies because they were a low-income family or household. So there was pretty significant segregation by wealth and by disability status that just is a function of how that market is structured. And in the context of scarcity wasn't just for these programs finding teachers or for families trying to find infant slots. We heard a story, and I included the quote here from a provider who, and this was not the only one that happened, but was talking about how at this point, because the cost, particularly of infant and toddler care, is so high, some families with several children are finding it's actually cheaper to hire a preschool teacher to come into your house and be a nanny in your house. And as this director of a series of childcare said, for every teacher that leaves a classroom to go work as a nanny or a provider in a home, that's another 5 to 15 families that really don't have care. And if they can't replace that teacher, they effectively have to close the class. And there were providers who told us that they weren't at full capacity because of these staffing shortages. So I share that as an example of just how challenged this market is at this point. Oops. Sorry, don't know what. Then the last key finding was that, and this actually came from both parents and providers, and it was also echoed by the employers at the Vital Community Summit. But what they said is that during the pandemic in particular, they began to appreciate just how important paid parental leave was. And it was very elemental. The providers told us about families who literally felt they couldn't afford to stay home with sick children. The problem is when those sick children come to school, they make others sick. And in particular, teachers talked about having teachers made sick. And again, in the context of this critical shortage of teachers, that meant often providers had to close because they couldn't staff the classrooms. And so this need for paid leave so that people didn't have to come in and expose others became very, very heightened. The other way it came up, and this came up at the Vital Community Summit, was that many parents can't find affordable infant care. So what they do is they leave their jobs. Infant care is very, very hard to find, but to the extent that there was paid leave, that would reduce the amount of time parents had to find childcare, which would reduce demand for those very, very scarce infant slots. So the observation was that one way to reduce the demand for those very hard to fill and staff infant slots is to actually give parents the capacity to stay home when they have an infant for a period of time. I mentioned also that there were several state legislative initiatives, and actually even since we wrote the report, there's been several more. So you may actually want to, one thing you may ask a subsequent committee to do is just monitor legislation and report back to you what's happening so that you can weigh the implications for you. We know that they did pass last year a bill that was a change to the child care subsidy program, which indicated an intent to increase subsidy and up to higher income levels. Would not affect all parents in Norwich because many parents are right over that threshold. But what it would do is reduce the burden by providing subsidies to parents. It is, however, not funded yet. And one of the things they're still discussing is how to fund that. So as this board thinks about what your role is, it is worth being mindful that at the same time, the legislature is trying to figure out what its role is with respect to funding. And so that's something that you might want to keep an eye on. There's still questions. Will it be targeted? Will it benefit certain families? We know it will be more likely to affect less wealthy families. Will that solve the shortage of supply that we're seeing in our area, where even if you had the resources, there actually isn't even a slot you could purchase sometimes? And we know the waiting lists are very, very long in many of these programs. What we've seen historically is that increasing subsidies has not led to increased supply. Giving parents a little bit more disposable income doesn't seem to stimulate the expansion of supply. And so that's something we're going to come back to later. The other piece of legislation that this board needs to pay attention to is that the legislature did a weighting study several years ago to evaluate whether or not the education funding formula was equitable. And from that study, there's now a bill moving through the legislature which proposes to adjust the weights in the education funding formula in ways that will drive more resources to towns that serve a disproportionate number of children who are from low income or more economically disadvantaged families, or children who live in very rural communities where the population is so sparse that the fixed cost of operating schools are higher. And they're also looking at additional support for English language learners. All three of those are categories that Norwich doesn't fall into. In fact, we have the lowest number of students who are economically disadvantaged in the state. So inevitably, when that goes through, that will probably lead to an increase in the tax rate, the education tax rate in the town of Norwich. We don't know yet how that will shake out. We don't know in what form or on what timeline. So as this board makes decisions, that's just something to have on your radar as well. And I believe the school district will also be trying to talk to voters about that this town meeting. And if anyone has questions, you should feel free to stop me. So what could help? It is possible that the federal government or the state will significantly increase resources for childcare, and hopefully at this point also in ways that that tackle some of the challenges for providers that serve children who are aged birth to 3, because that's an area where the need is most acute right now. And when we were meeting with national experts, we spoke among other people with someone named Taryn Morrissey, who has done a lot of research on contracting as a strategy for targeting your dollars to achieve your stated goals. And this is an example, and there's a link here if you want to go follow it up to some work she's done. But one of the things that some states have done is instead of giving subsidies to parents that parents just bring to any place that happens to have a space, what they are doing is creating space for the children who need it and in the locations that need it and for the ages that need it by contracting directly with providers and saying, we're going to give you this bigger reimbursement if you do these things. And it can also be tied to better wages, which is obviously critical to hiring and retaining those staff. These are all measures that in other contexts have proven to be successful at stabilizing the providers. This is not something you can do right now, though you do give some money currently to the Norwich Childcare Center, and it is tied to serving students from Norwich. But to the extent that there is new money that comes from the state or the federal government, one of the things that you may think about advocating for is the flexibility to apply those dollars in ways that meet the goals that you see here in Norwich. In other words, instead of just dispersing it as universal vouchers, you might say, you might ask if it was possible to target it at providers in exchange for better wages and serving those needs of kids we know aren't being served currently.
Rebecca, sorry to interrupt. And so would that would require policy at the state level, is that right?
Yes. Much of this right now, the state has retained the reins on early care and learning. Right. So they set the policy landscape in which you operate. So for example, the school district for those pre-K vouchers, the school district is obligated to pay, but the school district is not obligated to provide because it's handled under a different agency and it's a market model. It's not a public provision model. So you can't change that. You could not target that at individual providers because that's not something the state does. It's a state initiative where what is allowed and permissible is defined at the state level, not in communities as education is. Does that answer the question? So it's the kind of thing where if you see that there's significant monies that are coming through it might be worth speaking to your representative or your senator and saying,
Right.
have you considered, creating an option where communities or municipalities could apply to administer some of these resources through a grant program or a contracting program?
Okay, thank you so much. That's helpful.
Yeah, oops, sorry. I'm not sure why, but my thing is jumping ahead. So here are just two other things that could help. I think you need to keep your eyes open to see what happens at the state and federal level. There's been new additions even just this week. They're now looking at some kind of tax credit for families in Vermont. When we looked at the federal tax credits and the impact of those, we found that they do meet family needs, reduce poverty, make sure people have access to food, but they don't seem to have an impact on childcare because they often come too late and they often are too unreliable. So that has not really been effective at boosting supply of childcare, though it does meet other family needs, but it might affect your decisions. The state has talked about paid family and medical leave. It's coming up every year. It is possible that a bill will move there as well. It doesn't look like much will happen at the federal level at this point. In terms of local options, things that you actually could do, there are opportunities to engage, particularly through groups like Vital Communities, to explore opportunities for regional solutions. And one of the challenges that child cares have is that they're very small and they have to have a lot of overhead functions and oversight that is more costly on a per pupil basis the smaller you are. There might be ways to work with other communities in a regional way to put in systems of support that make it easier for the providers in your region. One of the things that we encourage you to do is to attend to equity at all levels. Norwich has long had a commitment to trying to make its school as inclusive as possible. We think that we should try to have our early care and learning environments reflect the communities our kids are going to grow up into as well. That's how they learn to be good citizens. And that unfortunately will take attention as well. And we know that while people at below a certain level on the income scale are subsidized by those childcare subsidies, there is a group of people just over that level. There's a benefits cliff where certain families actually struggle more and they have less disposable income to support some of these things because they're earning just too much to be eligible for some of the subsidies. Hopefully, when the state moves, it will address some of that. If it doesn't, that's something you may want to attend to as well. And then the last piece that we recommended you consider is other municipal investments or actions that might indirectly support families and providers. And one that came up was that one provider had said that one of the biggest limits on her ability to expand her program was the lack of a wastewater treatment facility. She couldn't put more classrooms on site with her septic system. She needed to have some kind of town or municipal wastewater treatment system. So there's things like that, where if you are moving at some point on some of those other initiatives, that might be an opportunity to think about whether or not it would also benefit this purpose as well. And obviously those are separate conversations that are also very complex. And you have a tough job because you have to weigh all of these issues. There are also some immediate activities that this group thought could keep going starting immediately if you choose to establish another board. Obviously, our charge is done and you would have to reconstitute a committee. But if you chose to put together another committee, there are a number of examples of things that they might do that we threw in to the end of the report on pages 28 through 30. And here are 3 examples. A new committee could create a dedicated web page building on draft content that we've already developed and some of it which has been shared with you, that could be maintained, that just when a new family moves to Norwich is an easy go-to place to find information about who the providers are regionally, what are the hours, what are the contact numbers and addresses and all of those things. And also could be a place where people might be able to connect with other people. Another suggestion was to look on this regional collaborations and solutions. I mentioned this earlier, but this might be a place where a committee could support and do research that then supported the decision-making of the select board on that issue. And another issue that came up and was suggested by some families was a formal volunteer network for incoming families or current families who are trying to figure out how to make it through this market. We found the committee was able to play a helpful role. The school now offers full-day pre-kindergarten. There were parents who wanted part-time pre-kindergarten because they have a nanny at home and they just wanted a short break and some socialization, who didn't need to tie up those full-day slots. And there are also parents who desperately needed those full-day slots. So the committee was able to support the school and help them identify programs so that parents could sort of reshuffle across providers and have a better match with what their own individual families needed. And there could be a way for a volunteer committee to help continue to do that kind of brokering of opportunities as well. And there's others in that report as well. And I'm just going to end by saying thank you to all the people who helped us do this report, the providers and the families, especially the providers. I mean, this was a pandemic. They were flat out exhausted. Near Tears, one of them. And they gave us so generously of their time to try to help us understand this issue so that you would have this information. And I also want to thank Miranda and Pam, who did tremendous work helping us navigate logistics, figure out how to get warned, and caught some errors and generally just made our life easier. So really appreciate their tremendous support and help. And I'm happy to answer any questions that you have. Oh, let me stop sharing.
Yes. Wow. Thank you so much for that. Those are really effective summary. I appreciated I can rewatch this presentation and then read through the pages in the report. So I really appreciated those annotations too. So Mary had suggested to me that, this is a future agenda item, we should really continue to reflect and schedule a future agenda item when when the board reconvenes as a possible new group. But if we have some initial reflections or questions, we should definitely do that, right? So Marcia, I saw your hand.
Yeah, thank you for this, Rebecca. I'm just wondering, knowing that initially it took an act of Congress to get this school district in order, and you sort of brushed on that a little bit in the report. If we did sort of look to doing something in a sort of cross-river regional way, what do you anticipate would be the likelihood of success given the differences in regulations and the two statutes in the two states?
I think it's an excellent question. I mein, really, that is a really excellent question. And I think a lot of it depends on, I think you would want to spend a lot of time researching it. If there is similar federal legislation, you would have to, it could be just an informal agreement. So it wouldn't actually be a shared governance structure. Dresden is a interstate district. It's a school district. And it is its own governing body, its own municipality. I don't think you could do that unless the schools decide to take over, childcare all the way down, which I don't see happening. So I think you'd probably be negotiating some kind of agreement around resource sharing, and it could be, what I've seen in some other parts of the state. It's providing support for enrollment processes and registration, providing support for professional development. So each provider doesn't have to do their own professional development. There's a shared regional capacity to do that. Anything that can be shared and operated at scale is something that potentially there's a way to do it. And I wouldn't want to minimize how hard that would be. When you think about the pre-K, part of the problem with even implementing a program like that, and you saw it with the decision of many school districts to stop offering childcare, we have two sets of federal laws, education and childcare. We have two sets of federal rules, education, childcare. We have two sets of state laws, education and childcare, and two sets of state rules, education, childcare. If you talk about bringing it over to New Hampshire as well, instead of having 4, you got 12. So it is exponentially more complicated. The places it works is when people decide on some kind of shared service that they can sort of pool and pool resources proportionally. And so that's how you'd have to do it. I think you're wise to be asking the question how it goes across state lines. We know that one of the challenges that Norwich is going to face with respect to Dresden is that New Hampshire funds schools differently than Vermont does. And that is going to leave Norwich in a different position relative to that shared budget than it does Hanover. So I think these are the questions you ask. Obviously, it's easier to evolve a municipal agreement than it is a single municipal entity.
Thank you.
Did I answer your question? I mean, there's a lot in that question. Yeah. That's a whole meeting. Yeah.
Claudette, I'm wondering if you had previously asked a question of the committee and the correspondence was brought forward in their discussions. Mm-hmm. Would you mind introducing it in this space so we can talk about it further? Do you remember your question?
Yeah, it had to do with when schools, I was listening to an NPR report, and the report focused on the state of New York or the city of New York. I can't remember which one. But when either the state or the city mandated pre-K education to be provided for in the schools, it sucked so many resources, financial resources, away from the standalone childcare providers, that some of those had to close, because the pre-K kids were actually subsidizing the infant children. And so one of the things that I found intriguing about this report, and I've read it a couple of times already, and I still come up with, wow, is how everything is so interrelated. And if you tweak, like Rebecca had mentioned, if you tweak one thing, there then is this cascading of events that all of those unintended consequences. So by the fact that the Norwich School District is doubling their pre-K size, I had concerns that it's going to impact our regional childcare centers, because it's taking those kids out of the private sector and putting them into the school. And so the private providers are going to be suffering a financial hit.
I thought it was such a good question. I would say that I would qualify it a little bit, because what we saw a couple things that are relevant to this just in the context of Norwich. There are private providers in Norwich that only serve children about 10 to 12 hours a week, and only at ages 3 to 5. That provider does not have a waiting list because there isn't enough demand for that. I mean, it didn't at the time that we called them. What the Norwich preschool had was a waiting list that was twice as long as the number of spots it had. There was a high demand in Norwich for what they were offering. The other program that didn't have trouble staffing and also recruiting was there was a private Montessori school. So it's not about public and private. It's about ages 3 to 5 versus 0 to 3. Mm-hmm. So I think because the private school in the sample that also provides pre-K also had no trouble staffing, pays its staff more, and is doing very well. So it's really about the age level. And so I think that you're absolutely right. What you saw, that study, we read that study in New York, and what she found is that when people had the option of going to a school-based program, tended to have more resources and support because they're affiliated with the school, and the teachers are better paid. So there's more stability. What it did is it crowded out some of the providers that served some of those younger kids. That's happened in Vermont too. And in fact, if you look at the Norwich numbers, the Vermont side of the river versus the New Hampshire side of the river, you'll see that the disproportionality between 0 to 3 and 3 to 5 is bigger in Vermont than it is in New Hampshire, in the New Hampshire providers, because that's consistent with what you're describing. To me, the question is, how do you reconnect the birth to 3-year-olds to the 3 to 5-year-olds? How do you not incentivize any program, public or private, that only serves older kids in a way that breaks the business model of programs that serve those younger kids? And there's two ways to do it. I mean, there are different ways. We've seen we looked at examples in other parts of the state. We don't have the excess space in our school that some communities do. We talked to one community where they closed a small school building, but they turned it into a childcare for 0 to 5-year-olds. And the school district provides the pre-K, but there's a private provider on the site who runs a business, and she just moved her business into the school. And it's amazing. You walk in, they've just taken this old building. They've already got food. The district maintains it, so it's brought down her overhead. She's raised her salaries. But the key is 0 to 5. You have to find some way to reunite the younger kids with the older children, or the business models don't work.
So that I had a question about business models, because you just sort of touched on a little bit, was an experience that I had in growing up in my school district. There were 4 elementary schools. The 4th elementary school didn't have the enrollments. They used it for administrative staff, and also began a series of private contracts to make use of this building. And so the school district maintained early childcare, and then also after school providers. They had 3 different providers that they worked with. And then school enrollment got booming, and then they kicked out the administrative staff and continued to maintain those private partnerships in sort of a divided building. And so my thought was, to what, if there are declining enrollments, what it could be a potential, although I think they're more recently sustained now, but it could be a potential conversation to know more from the school communities about what their building assets look like, and how they may or may not want to accommodate, this kind of process. It was one thought I had. And then I guess my actual question would be, what is the role of the municipality in supporting something like an RFQ process for something like these family providers whose business, there's certain aspects of their business model that might need more support to grow deeper legs for, to grow or, move potentially into an actual different space, their business. So I guess my question broadly is, how can municipalities provide resources, monetary or otherwise, to support business models, alternative business models for particularly these family providers who we see declining, right, because of the other policy decisions that are made. I don't know if that makes sense.
I think there's a couple of issues there. First of all, there are no family providers left in our area. They've all been replaced with center-based care. And center-based care appeals to a lot of parents because it feels more like school. And there's actually a preference for that. That's actually a parent preference. But when you lose that market, and if you go through the slides of Taryn Morrissey in the appendix, you'll see she has some slides on family providers and looks at the different kind of care that people from different income groups go to. The family providers tended to serve the less wealthy families on average, and they also serve families who work unusual work schedules. So one of the challenges that we heard from some of the businesses in West Lebanon, for example, is that if people are working second or third shift, you can't rely on a center-based care that's only open from 7:30 to 5:30, because that's not when your shift is. So that there's lots of need for that kind of thing. So the ways, and I'd be happy to send you follow-up links to some examples of programs in the state of Vermont. Burlington did some, they actually contracted, they basically gave some providers some money in exchange for a set of commitments. So it's not like, here's money, do what you want. It's, we need more seats, and we need seats for this kind of kid. So we're going to give you this money, and in return, you're going to open up a classroom that serves these kids. And they do it that way. That's the contracting example. And I can give you, there are other examples in the report. I just pulled one up for tonight. And you can look at that, and Taryn Morrissey would be a great resource on that. The other one, there are several school districts that have started childcares in old buildings. They don't run them. They contract with a private provider who comes in and uses the facilities. And many of them assist the provider by maintaining, they plow it, they heat it. they provide the food, they provide those other services, which means that the resource that the private provider has, they can put them into the staff, for example. They can pay higher wages and then hold on to those staffs. And so that's another example that we've seen. And that would be a great, I can follow up and send you some examples of that. Mary has some of them too, or we can also recommend that another subsequent committee take that on. But they're good examples. At the end of the day, I would be remiss if I didn't say there's also no way to fix this without more money. The budgets for these childcares are so thin, and childcare spend a larger proportion of their total budget on staff, which means there's just no money there. There's no, even if you gave them a building, there's still no money there to get the job done. So that they really do need resources if this is going to be a viable sector. The question is, how do you manage a sector so that if you're making a public investment, it actually serves a public purpose? I think that's the challenge.
That's great. Thank you. Rob, yeah, sorry.
Yeah, and it's a real issue. I mean, there are childcares that get 3, Act 166 pre-K vouchers, and you can, they're in gyms, and you can drop your kid off and go work out for 2 hours and then take your kid. That's a valuable good. We also have parents who are literally giving up their jobs and that affects their livelihood because they can't find childcare. So there's a whole spectrum of need here.
Mm-hmm. Yes, thank you. Rob, do you have any questions or any thoughts?
I'm curious as to the demographics of the child care workers that are in such short supply. One of the things I'm curious about in general about the low unemployment rate is, did the people who dropped out of the workforce, were they more often older and are not likely to come back under any circumstances? Or was it child care workers evenly distributed across the age brackets? Any idea?
I don't have an exact breakdown. I could probably figure out how to get it to you because I will take a note and see if I can find it for you. What I can tell you is the state has been working very hard to incentivize people to come into this sector by paying for some of their education, providing access to special programs that train them and setting up modified licensure timelines so that they can come in. But the reality is, even if the state gives you the degree, if you come in and you're making $15 an hour in a pretty stressful job, even though you love kids, if you can make more without needing any of that education someplace else, it's just hard to hold on to these people because they have families too. And that's been the problem. And it's just, we had one provider who said, I love kids, but I got to eat and my kids have to eat. I have to also take care of my own family. And so there's a bit of that. There's, I think there are people who probably are leaving now, or when they close, they're just not going to come back because it's too hard and they're too far along in their careers. We heard sort of stories along all those lines, people saying that they were going to leave or not coming in. But we also know that there's a critical shortage of young people entering this pipeline at the very beginning right now.
Great. Mary, did you have anything to add? Obviously, you've been instrumental in this work, so I imagine you've brought a lot of your comments to the committee itself, but anything else that you're on mute?
Sorry.
Okay.
I was just so impressed with the committee members. I think they, did the lion's share of the work. I think that they came up with really good research and really good information about the landscape of childcare. And I do think that there are some threads that we could follow up with, and some of them would not be sort of high resource threads. For instance, the volunteer network and the website, just connecting new parents to what's available and so forth. But then I also just see a very strong need for advocacy for any of this to be solved. That, as Rebecca said, it just seems like an overwhelming amount of subsidy that's needed to actually fix this problem, and are, commendable efforts by the state to add, I think it's 10 hours per week. Is that right? To add a small amount of it, that's commendable. But really, if it's going to be done in any kind of humane and equitable way, it has to be much more comprehensive. It has to be paid family leave. It has to be a robust program for, birth through 5 in order to work. So that seemed extremely overwhelming to me as a, select board member to contemplate that, because it's really part of our national politics and our state politics as well as the local politics. So that's just how I feel about it. But I do think there are things we can do, and we should do them. And if advocacy is needed, I don't really know how to do that, but I'm willing to learn or find people that are effective at that. And I think it could be, bringing in state representatives, or, could take any number of forms. But I think there's kind of a more low-key local involvement that we can have. And then I think some strong advocacy would be needed to affect anything on the state or national level. So.
Sure. Okay. Thank you, Mary. So I think we should probably, move on, but I think before we, in our agenda, but before we do that, I should ask both of you, Mary and Rebecca, what are the ambitions of the current committee right now, would you say? Is there, after writing this report and having the key findings, are there particular ideas that the committee itself is interested in exploring, or is there any? Do they themselves, as members, feel like there's some findings that they would like to follow up on? Can you tell us anything about the group and where they see the work right now?
I mean, we spoke about this a bit at the last meeting, and I can't speak for everybody. I think there are some members who feel like they've done something valuable and are ready to step on. I think there was a consensus that if you do reconvene a committee, you should throw it open and see if there's other people who haven't had a chance to have a say who also might want to apply to you, and then you can make your decision based on that broader pool. So I think the expectation was that if you do this again, that you would, again, put out the word as you did when this one was first formed.
Okay. And then finally, and then we'll move on if that's okay with board members, was there a key finding that spoke most deeply, to the committee, or would you say not particularly? It was just the whole set of them.
Well, just to go back to what Robert said, when the schools did not have trouble finding staff, none of the schools did. And it's because they pay their teachers well. Okay. There is no way to fix this without paying the childcare teachers better. There just isn't. And I think one of the takeaways is that a lot of the solutions being pushed and advocated may not be nuanced enough to solve this problem. So I know we said advocacy, and Mary, you said it again. I don't think I really think there's a very powerful way to change the story people tell, because a lot of the simple solutions may not actually help. And the reason we gave that example in the report of what happened after the pre-K vouchers is sometimes the simple solution may make things worse. And what was powerful was to have seen that data. And then we did have one of the providers in our sample say, when I can't hold on to 3 to 5 year olds, I can't provide care for infants. Having that said and telling those stories to other people, I hope will shake us off of some of the solutions we've been pursuing that really aren't making the difference that our families need, and frankly, these providers need as well. So I'm glad you put this committee together, and I hope that the report that we were able to produce helps you have those conversations. And can't thank you all enough, and I can't thank the committee members enough.
Yes, I think that's well, thank you so much. We really appreciate you being here and for all the committee's work, and like the quality of this report is really top notch. Like, this is a real, I'm proudly forwarded to the folks at Vital Communities and other folks engaged in regional questions. So this is I'm really thankful, and I think we all are.
Okay. Thank you so much. Take care.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Okay. So I think the next item on our agenda is the discussion of ongoing litigation. So obviously this is a two-part motion, which is available on our motion sheet. The only thing I would add to the suggested motion, the second suggested motion is to ensure that we invite counsel in with us and also our interim town manager. Okay, so go ahead, Claudette.
Yeah, just before I make that motion, I'm happy to shift to the executive session, but if we have the stamina after this, I would appreciate feedback from the rest of the board on our presentation. But having said that, I'm going to make this motion.
Please.
I move to find that premature general public knowledge about ongoing litigation in Katucki versus Town of Norwich would place the select board at a substantial disadvantage because it would disclose legal strategy.
I second that.
Okay, made by Claudette, seconded by Mary. All in favor, please raise your hand. Okay, unanimous. Thank you. Is there a second motion?
I move to enter executive session under 1 VSA section 313A1E and invite the town manager and council to attend.
Okay, thank you. Is there a second?
I second that.
Okay, made by Claudette, seconded by Mary. All in favor, please raise your hand. Okay, unanimous. So I'll put folks into the waiting room and pause the recording.
I'll be right back.
Okay.
Recording stopped. Recording in progress.
Okay, is there a motion to, Claudette stepped away. Okay, is there a motion to enter public session?
So moved.
Okay, is there a second?
Second.
Okay, made by Mary, seconded by Marcia at 9:43. All in favor, please raise your hand. Okay, thank you. We're now in public session. We have one more item on the agenda that we want to talk about. I actually need to just step away for 2 minutes. Do we want to take a little 5-minute break? If we can? Okay, so let's do that and come back at 9:50, exactly an hour later. Okay. Okay.
Recording stopped.
Okay, it's 9:50. I'll push the recording back on.
Recording in progress.
Okay, resuming the Wednesday, February 9th select board meeting at 9:50. So in 10, 15 minutes, let's discuss the next agenda item, which is sort of feedback on the presentation for future revision. We've been talking a little bit about, how to harness this work to provide information to the community. Claudette, do you want to talk about this agenda item and talk about what kind of feedback we're looking for from the group?
Sorry, I didn't mean to black myself out. I was actually just looking for if the board thought we didn't focus enough on something, focus too much on another thing, should include something else. And just, yeah, that's it.
Great. Marcia?
Yeah, I thought overall it was nicely done. And the only thing, because I judge reactions, how was it received by people? Yeah. There's been some comments on the listserv, and they seem to cluster around Article 7. And so I think the only thing I would suggest is to focus on the fact that previously any surplus monies were held in a undesignated way, and that this move is actually giving voters control. Yeah. Because the money is actually being approved by them to go into a designated fund, which is known in the statutes as a reserve fund, which has to be used for the specific purpose for which that fund was created. And that although the board had the right to give the money back to the voters, because all money that's voted for the town use is from the voters. And once we've got the money, we can spend it as we need to keep the lights on. But where we've overestimated, or for some reason, like, some of the positions were not filled for a year or more, that sort of thing, where that adds up, we could have chosen to give it back, but instead made a nod to the fact that we've had emergencies. The climate emergency sort of thing is not going away. And that in order to help the town avoid the costs of having to get monies when things happen, this is a beginning attempt to be prepared in a significant way. And even though it wouldn't rise to the level of $1 million that we might have needed for the flood, it's certainly a major step. That's all.
Claudette, just follow up?
Yeah, just a quick follow-up is especially for the February 14th meeting. I think having it provides us with the informality to have other board members speak in support of the various articles, whereas the moderated February 28th John may not allow us to have that degree of participation.
And I think, and then I'll get to Mary's comment, and just to follow up, I think also I think have in part because we were really well prepared. Thank you, Rod. We have a real knowledge of this. And so, I would probably actually in the Q&A, if it were to come up, or even if it doesn't, I would actually, and if I guess I'm in the facilitator role, I would probably turn to you, Marcia, and ask if you could, in your own words, like kind of provide an explanation. Because I think that helps when people hear like a turn of phrase or, a different tone or anything. It provides clarity sometimes. So
just a different way.
Yeah. If that helps, if you're comfortable, and if anyone's comfortable, I'll do that.
Yeah, I'm happy to do that.
Okay. Mary?
I just thought what Marcia said was the most eloquent thing she's ever said. And as a skeptic on the board, if you get her right out there, she's going to be able to educate the town.
Yeah.
And I can't be at that meeting. But I hope you get Marcia front and center on that.
I do have a way of saying things that provide
confidence, right?
That are provide some clarity that I fumble around with. Just like when I asked for the visual, I think to me that visual that Rod developed helped me, but I can't articulate it as well as you can, Marcia.
Yeah.
Thank you. It's 25 years of teaching students.
I think also too, like, and to keep it all that too, but also I think like the electorate is broad and we are a diverse group, right? And so people know we're oriented differently on like governance and affairs. And so to see a similar through line from all of us, I think is a strong message. Mary?
It's probably not possible, but it's just so irritating to see misinformation on the listserv. I don't know what the counteracting force is, but I just am so profoundly irritated by it.
Yeah. May I, Roger?
Please.
I've struggled with whether or not to respond to the clear misinformation that's been presented. And I have written a few draft responses, and they've stayed as draft responses.
Good instinct.
Because I'm struggling whether or not to
respond, right?
To respond. And yeah. I don't want to fuel the flames and just get to the he said, she said, or the blah, blah, blahs. And that's why they've stayed as drafts. But it irritates me profoundly, and it bothers me profoundly when it just seems to be
willful misinformation,
purposeful disinformation,
purposeful and willful disinformation. I think it's crummy.
So I think so let's jump to I think the second part of what I wanted to talk about, which is, what to do when we see any sort of chatter about any of the articles. And I think a good thing would be to, send just, not in a response, just send out, routinely our work that we have prepared to inform people. So one of the additional things I thought to do is obviously a recording of the February whatever that meeting was, the Saturday meeting was available. So wait, hold on, Ron, you have your hand up?
Fourth
or fifth? Oh, you're saying fifth. Fifth. Is
how many
so long ago?
I think, and obviously you probably noted that a script was developed, right? For that presentation. So I think what we were going to do was record ourselves. Claudia and I were going to record ourselves in an abbreviated presentation, ask Miranda to upload it to the town's YouTube channel, and then distribute that accordingly. And so we would have a presentation to offer people that is more compact, right? You don't have, there was some confusion about the agenda at the beginning. we won't have that as part of, people have a more succinct presentation from us. So I think we definitely wanted to do that.
And you could link it to a listserv message saying, here's information, and just link it for people.
Yeah.
And look, I wanted to say that I cannot make it to that February 14th meeting. Mm-hmm. I've got another meeting to attend, so I won't be able to cheerlead, as much as we might like with the whole group, but certainly support everything that we're doing on it. I also think it represents a lot of work on our part on behalf of the town. And it's this huge gap that's just been there for years that we're finally closing and making it fair to the electorate. It's a big deal. And it just irritates the hell out of me to have somebody misrepresent it.
Yeah.
It really does. But like Claudia, I just sort of choke it off, but I'm so sick of it. But really the correct information is the high road, and I think it is a good suggestion.
Yes.
Yes.
I for one appreciate both of your restraint while we get going on information. Marcia, did you have a comment?
Yeah, I mean, I worry about the black cloud. You know, what happens if it isn't approved? Then, you know, by rights, we should probably give it back to the voters. But how do we do that in, you know, in terms of tax stuff?
A question for a future scenario that I hope we don't face, right?
I think we'd have to have a special meeting, and then, you know, we'd have to give it all back. And then if there was an emergency, we just have to get a line of credit or something like that.
Let's not speculate.
Let's not get too dark cloud about it. I imagine it will seem quite sensible and it will pass.
So so I want to talk about some things that we talk about this as a level service budget in part because of the fact that the services people can expect the same level of services. And consequently, we don't sort of have any slides that break down or discuss the budget at the operating budget at a substantial length. Do we want to add anything? Do we want to add in any more points about the operating budget?
I would say no.
Okay.
Is it worth just focusing on the fact that the pandemic has caused all of the costs to rise? Just a little bit to say
inflation.
Yes.
Yeah.
That, you know, we really had to do something a little bit higher, and we tried to keep it as low as possible, but everybody's experiencing the same thing.
I touched on that briefly, but I can go into it a little bit more. Yeah,
you did.
Rod, what do you think? Is that
I'm glad that Masha raised it. Technically, because we're posting an increase in the budget that's lower than the rate of inflation, we've actually reduced the budget in real terms. So, okay, it's a bit of a convoluted kind of expression in economics, but you know, if you were going to be steady state, if everything was going to be exactly the same, we would increase our budget exactly the same as inflation in the Northeast. And what we've done is we've increased our budget less than the rate of inflation in the Northeast, which, in the words of an economist, means that we have instituted some savings. We've actually reduced the size of the budget in real terms. Maybe you want to think about actually emphasizing that a little bit more.
Yeah,
because realistically, it's about 2% less, roughly, about 1.7% less than the rate of inflation. So it's like a 1.7% reduction in the budget. But programmatically,
right,
we're actually doing, you know, and we've not done it by cutting a program or cutting staff or anything such as that. In fact, if anything, there's a slight broadening in program. You know, if you look at the rec department, for instance, or something such as that, right? So, and that's probably the department that's been most heavily impacted revenue-wise.
Right.
But so even in light of reduced revenue, we've reduced, in real terms, we've reduced the size of the budget. I don't want to get too carried away. It's 1.7%. Like, you know, it's not huge, but it's. But on the other hand, it's not nothing when you could have just like gone, oh my God, it's really bad, and then bumped the budget 7% and been over inflation. Said, people, it's okay. It's only 2% more than the rate of inflation. We didn't do that.
Yeah,
you know, we've said we've come in under the rate of inflation. It's actually a fairly big deal.
It is a big deal.
Yeah. And to a certain extent, that refers back to last year's budget, where we bit the bullet and raised it as much as necessary to get back on a good status for services. And now we're not having to come back and ask for another raise because of that.
Right. And the only difference is, I would argue, a different budget process and different staff. And different staff.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
So we thank you, staff, at one point in our presentation.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Okay. I thought two things. So we talk about the article on the policing study and the article on the sidewalk study as part of a wider narrative for the Operational Performance Fund. I realized questions came up about what a potential study for the sidewalk would look like. And I assume people may want a similar question answered for the policing study. So I would like to propose 2 simple slides about that, about each of these articles. Because otherwise you just address it in the Q&A and we don't then have the slides we don't have the slides independently addressing them at all. Go ahead, Marcia.
So I had a question about that because my understanding coming in after the fact and hearing what was,
Sure.
the problems, it seemed to me that the second step that was required that couldn't happen because we didn't have any funds is very different from what we're asking to do now. And I think, is that not true? And shouldn't we make that clear?
I think a couple of things, and board members help me out. So Mary, I think Mary sort of introduced the idea that this is a phase 2, and phase 2 in the sense that we thought that the grant program, the V-Trans grant program, was conducted in 3 parts, and that the phase 2 was independent of construction. And so we thought that phase 2 would address potential issues that were identified in phase 1. And what we're calling our phase 2 of that Beaver Meadow project this article would still potentially address some of these questions, but it would also then expand it to create all of that in the context of a wider plan for sidewalks. So I think what you're raising is like actually what we need to tell people.
Yeah.
Does anyone agree with what I just said? Because that will be the slide-ish.
I do.
Okay.
Maybe get Marcia to explain it. Really?
Yeah.
Marcia again.
I just came in on that when you were here.
Well, I won't be there, so.
And it's part of the whole. One of the things that Rod alluded to is going into the Dubois and King study. The focus of that study was, in hindsight, quite narrow. And when alternatives to the study were proposed, they were not embraced by Dubois and King.
Right, they were down.
So the entire list of options that potentially could be available were not presented. And I think this money could help flush out that proposal more broadly.
Then we'd still have to start the process again.
Well,
if you're looking for a grant and all of that, right?
well, that's true. Well, it might be a grant for a lesser project or a more comprehensive one that would include other elements from other parts of town. It could be quite different.
Right.
So
this is more of a broad fact finding.
I'm going to actually turn to Rod a little bit on this because when I saw this coming down the pike in our community and I saw the petition, I turned to him in preparation for the agenda. So Rod, can you provide a little bit more summary of the spirit and intention of the article, not because we don't know, but because we want to be precise.
Sure. So actually, I just want to flag at the beginning before I forget, because it's late. I think that I've come across some other questions about what does that creation of this fund actually mean or look like for studies beyond the police study and the sidewalk. So what I would prefer to call the pedestrian and bike facilities study, focusing on importantly focusing on Beaver Meadow Road and the surrounding area. So the purpose behind the most succinct way of talking about the purpose of Article 7 is to do for ourselves, the town of Norwich.
Article 11, I think.
What's that?
Not Article 7.
Oh, okay. It's not Article 7. That's right. It's 11. Sorry. It is late. I think I renumbered them so many times I've lost completely what number they are, but that's okay. So it's Article 11. So the purpose of that study is to actually do, as Marsha pointed out, do the part of phase 2 that we needed to get done, and then place it in a broader context of looking at pedestrian and bike facilities, focusing on the village area in general. And so the reason why you would want to do that is that things to do with the purpose of any kind of improvement in bike and pedestrian facilities along Beaver Meadow Road should be done in the context of, well, what is it going to do for a cyclist or a pedestrian? Is it going to connect to something? If it's going to connect to something, how does it connect to it? Why that road and not another road? Or the more classic traffic safety problem is, if you just end it somewhere, what happens to all the people that you've encouraged to get on at the beginning, right? Like, where do they go at the end? And so everyone's just
Forrest Gump question.
What's that?
It's a Forrest Gump question.
It is a Forrest Gump question. You're very right. Forrest Gump was a big traffic planner.
Right.
So the point is that, it needs to be understood in that kind of context, right? Like, so, and so I think the key is there's just two things. Really do the phase 2 part, which is focus on the things that the Dubois King report actually did identify. The complexity of obtaining site control for right of way, the ledge, the number of crossings that you'd have to institute to crisscrossing from one side of the street to the other, what the alternatives were, like really flesh that out. And then the other part about it is that it's not a criticism of the Dubois King study necessarily. I think that the estimates for the cost were low, or a little low, and then what's happened in the intervening year or so is that specifically costs associated with that kind of activity have really skyrocketed, right? And so we know that it's not really a $1.5 million kind of thing anymore. We think it's way more, and that means that the town, particularly in the end, the select board has an obligation to explain to the taxpayers and the residents, what that would look like from a budget point of view. Even though we would hopefully access a grant, there's a lot of difference between, say, $300,000 and $600,000, which is the difference in the contribution that we would make to a grant with a total project cost of 1.5 versus, say, 3. Now, maybe we can do it for better than 3 or whatever, and that's great, but it's still a serious question for people to actually really chew on, which is, do we think that that's worth it or what? And I think that the second part, which is a little vaguer, but it's still really important. It makes sense if you look at a map of Norwich, if you look at Google Maps or something and just stare at it, it's like it's the southern side of Huntley Meadows. What's happening to the other sides? And what are these loops and why do we want to improve them? And is it more important to do that than to do something else? And I think that, the community can engage around those kinds of questions and issues. by saying it that way, I'm presenting them as, sort of in a didactic way of this, how you would go about constructing the study and how you would go about writing the final report. But those are the kinds of questions that I think that people are owed an answer to, right. Which is not to dismiss the virtues of the project as they've been presented so far.
Go ahead, Marcia.
So, one of the things that always gives me pause is if you hire a certain type of person or company and ask them to give you a report on something, they're going to look at it through their lens. And so it seems to me Dubois and King, for example, does a certain type of building, but do they necessarily have the experience or credentials to be guiding us in terms of safety? Because I think one of the issues, the underlying issues here is safety for people. So it might be that it's not wanted by the majority of people in town to build a sidewalk loop, but probably nobody would bat an eye about doing something that would make it safer for the people who live there and want to walk. So that's kind of my concern about when you select somebody to do something like a study.
I think if we were to foreground the safety question or make that a key question along with some of the other issues that we've identified, then that would be reflected in any kind of RFQ that you put out. And then the panel of people, assuming that the panel of people that we would use in town to review the responses to the RFQ would also develop a sense of, if you like, priorities. And you would hopefully select a firm that fit the priorities that you've observed. And there are differences, and there's just distinct differences in engineering firms that practice in this field. So that's how you would approach that problem.
And so my final point, just to wrap up this discussion, unless anyone else has anything else to say, is I think that's also what this achieves too, is while we appreciate and want to continue to harness any grassroots efforts of the community and of vocalizing their desires, their engagement around this issue, this process also, asks the committees, notably the Planning Commission, to direct the project more meaningfully. It actually is not just about a consultant studying something for us to, make a determination on, but rather going from the people to a committee to further study with town staff and then back to us, right? It's a step back to go a step forward. Okay, so I think that was really helpful intel. And then the only thing I think we wanted to add a slide on the policing study. I think the way that I would choose to do this is we have bids, and Rod had in a memo to us, in broad terms characterized the two studies. I don't think it would be appropriate to say that we selected, we were ready to go on one, but I do think we could say that on December 22nd, there was one that we were more interested in, and rather not necessarily name the firm, but name the virtues of what the firm proposed. Does that make sense? Go ahead, but you don't like that.
No, I'm not sure we need to.
Okay.
We didn't receive any questions about that. I'm not sure we need to get into that. I mean, I'm happy to, but it'd
be smarter not to.
I know why we don't want to talk about it, but I think it's important that we just characterize the two studies and let people.
Okay, I get what I get where you're coming from. Okay.
Like if people want to make public comments, or if it opens up an opportunity for people to not like the efforts that we have made, we're seeking financing for a process that we set and finish. and we need to tell them a little bit about the work that we are asking to finance.
Yeah. So, and if we're talking about the bike ped thing, then yeah, okay.
Right.
I'm okay with putting a slide in.
It's all good. It's honest information.
All right. I'm good. Are you guys good? I'm good.
I'm so good.
I'm like really good.
I'll be there for you guys.
Okay, good. We're feeling good. All right. So we can
can I move to adjourn?
You can move
and I'll second it.
And you'll second. And
question.
I'm really appreciative of this meeting. I really appreciate we've made a hire. We took correspondence very thoroughly. We had an intense executive session in terms of its length. And so, thank you.
And thank you, Roger, I mean, you've done yeoman's work.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. And thank you, Rod. And everybody else. Tracy Hall.
Congratulations,
thanks,
Rod.
Thanks very much. I'll share that with people at Tracy Hall. Thanks a lot.
And, as well as DPW.
Yes, I'll be seeing them at 10 o'clock tomorrow morning.
The 2-foot snowstorm that was, my road's good.
That's good. That's good.
All right. So now I'll call the question. How's that?
Yeah. What was the question?
We're gonna go.
Put
your hands up. Here, put your hands up. We're good.
Right. Good night.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.